Thank you. Good morning and good afternoon to all. It is my pleasure to join you today to open today's network dialogue on tackling the socioeconomic consequences of COVID-19 on migrants and their community, why integration matters. My name is Amy Muden. I'm the deputy head of the UN Network on Migration Secretariat here in place of Jonathan Prentice, who is unable to join us this afternoon. Just allow me a few words of introduction to put this event into a larger scope for us. So today's dialogue is taking place as part of the network's Migration Week. Migration Week is an umbrella event inviting our partners at the global, regional, and national levels to hold or participate in events or activities as they prepare for the first global review of the Global Compact for Safe, Orderly, and Regular Migration. That's the International Migration Review Forum, which will take place this May at UN headquarters in New York. Migration Week kicks off our 100-day countdown then to this forum, and it's an opportunity to showcase the good practices in implementing the Global Compact while galvanizing strong engagement by all actors to build momentum towards this first global review of the Global Compact in 3 months' time. Migration Week aims to foster discussions between all stakeholders and focus on future thinking, drawing from the successes and challenges to date in implementing the Compact. I'm very pleased that the network has undertaken this work that we're going to discuss today on the importance of the integration of migrants in our communities as we continue through this pandemic. It is an important point linked well with the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. To ensure successful integration within our communities helps assure that we leave no one behind. As we head towards this first global review of the Compact, governments must demonstrate the value of international cooperation in forging collective solutions to work towards safe, orderly, and regular migration. And at the same time, it's also important that we discuss cooperation at all levels, including at the local and community levels. So it is my hope that during our dialogue today that we can consider pledges in the context of integration, of migrant integration in our communities to bring forth and to bring life to the Global Compact and to share good examples of that through the network's repository of practices. As we focus on integration, let us really seek out those actions that will make a tangible difference to the lives of migrants and their communities, including through these days of the pandemic. Let me stop there, and I wish you all a very productive dialogue today, and I thank you for joining us.
Thanks very much, Amy. Colleagues, welcome. My name is Michelle Layton. I'm the Chief of the Labor Migration Branch and Program globally for ILO, and we're really delighted to be here and to collaborate with the UN Network and, of course, UNDP in convening this webinar session, launching the report. Let me just give a few points as introduction, and then we'll move on to our distinguished panelists. But we can see that this report is really going to be important, we think, in helping governments move forward. And it's particularly so given the impacts of COVID-19 on migrants and their communities. Migrant workers make up 70% now of the world's migrants of working age. That's 169 million migrant workers, out of 169 million migrants, 70% are migrant workers, but nearly half of those are women. And together with their families, they've been some of the most severely affected. And apologies, I'm hearing perhaps microphones on. Colleagues, maybe we can mute the microphones while we're joining. But let me just continue by saying that even before the pandemic, migrant workers faced high levels of discrimination and inequality. Many work in the informal economy, in precarious jobs, and they risk exploitation. The ILO has been concerned, in fact, for many years, that migrant workers are facing these areas of discrimination, inequality, and so on. But it's sometimes due to the fact that labor migration governance is fragmented, it's complex, and it's also inconsistent across migration corridors. And the pandemic exposed how these weak systems concerning migrants have made them even more vulnerable. Many suffered not being able to access social protection, not being entitled to social protection. And in many respects, they don't enjoy the same rights in many areas as national workers. They earn less than national workers for the same jobs. And in some countries, this is as high as 40% less. Some, like migrant domestic workers, are not even covered by national labor laws, and they have higher risk to their health and safety, especially those who are working in the care economy and healthcare, which is so essential for our communities. Now, this can lead to negative social and economic outcomes for women and men migrant workers, and not just in the short term, but throughout their working lives, trapping them in low-skilled and low-wage jobs. So the report that we are launching today provides new insights on the COVID-19 impacts on migration, but it also provides examples and lessons where we see some good progress and promising practices that can help countries improve their integration of migrants in society. It includes protecting the rights of migrant workers and all migrants, providing fair recruitment, access to skills development and recognition, and to Social Security wherever they live and work. The recommendations also provide important lessons for governments on the reintegration of migrants and returning migrant workers and how they can better contribute to their home countries and building back better. Now, migrant workers will continue to be an important group of actors and stakeholders in our communities and our societies. And so we must ensure that the social contract extends to all migrants and their families. They bring talent, they bring skills, they bring experiences that can improve our economies, but also our societies. And they deserve and are entitled to our support, our protection, our tolerance, and non-discrimination. And I'm pleased that we have such a diverse group with us today, both in terms of the participants, but also the panelists representing government, business, trade unions, civil society, and we have migrants themselves, and we'll hear from some of them a little bit later. We do hope you'll engage in the dialogue with us during the session and really look forward to your participation and active participation. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce Ms. Catherine Marchand from the UN University Merit Program, who will provide an overview of the report. And I think she has a PowerPoint to share. Catherine, you want to turn your video on, please?
Yes, thank you very much, Michelle. Let me quickly share my screen and then I'll take it from there. I hope everyone can see that now. So yeah, also good morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are in the world from my side. I'm very happy to be here today. So my name is Catherine Marchand. I'm a researcher in the field of migration studies, and I have been for a number of years now. And I work at Maastricht University and the United Nations University Merit, which are both based in the Netherlands. I'm happy to have the chance today to briefly present the report tackling the socioeconomic consequences of COVID-19 on migrants and their communities by Integration Matters, for which we at UN Merit collaborated closely with the colleagues at the ILO and UNDP to launch it then today, which is very exciting for us after such a long time coming. So what I would like to do in the next 10 minutes is to briefly summarize the report, before then handing over back to the colleagues for the interesting discussions and hearing from the panelists, which are very closely related then, of course, to the contents of this report. And as you can see, I will start with some context on migration and the COVID-19 pandemic, then briefly talk about the socioeconomic impacts of the pandemic on migration, migrants and return migrants and their communities, the socioeconomic responses to the crisis and ways to foster socioeconomic reintegration or integration and social cohesion beyond recovery. So really looking at the long-term perspective. And then I will finish with a short conclusion. And all of this is really just a very brief overview of the full report. So I encourage you to take a look at it in the time following this presentation. So migrants, of course, play, as Michelle also already said, play a key role in many sectors of societies around the world. Their contributions have also been instrumental in many national responses to the COVID-19 crisis. And they have significantly contributed as frontline and essential workers in key sectors such as health and agriculture, which were very important in the process of how the pandemic evolved. At the same time, as Michelle also already said, the pandemic has exacerbated many of the issues that many migrants already faced beforehand, especially with regards to their vulnerable situation when it comes to enjoying their rights and the protection of their rights in terms of decent work, housing conditions, access to basic service, including health services, and other common challenges, which I'm sure most of you are very familiar with, so we don't need to go into detail today. This paradox is also acknowledged in the Global Compact for Safe and Orderly Migration, which recognizes the great potential that benefits, the potential benefits of migration, while also highlighting the lack of rights, protection, and challenges created by poorly governed human mobility. So the different COVID-19 variants and the kind of inequitable access to vaccines and to treatment have delayed the potential end of the pandemic while we have seen the vaccinations rolled out. But we therefore find this a very timely point in time to consider addressing issues concerning migrant situation, not only within the response to the pandemic, but also looking beyond. And that's what this report really then focuses on. So let's start by briefly looking at the impacts that the global pandemic has had on migrants and their communities, before then moving on at looking at the responses. So it is very clear that border and mobility restrictions, of course, that were imposed during the pandemic reduced international migration between destination and origin countries. We also know that migrants who had already been working in these countries were affected in different ways, including challenges with accessing health services, social protection, and other essential services, both during the pandemic, but also more generally, of course, and also in terms of education or employment-related challenges, often including discrimination in wages and vulnerable working conditions, which became even more vulnerable during the pandemic. When it comes to return migration, both during and of course also as a result of the pandemic, this further shaped international migration patterns and posed several challenges for returnees, but also for the communities in countries of origin, of course, and also the national governments in countries of origin. So a lot of varied impacts that of course, we looked at in this report, and that you will find a lot more detail, of course, in the report on all of these issues. So then let's take a look at what different countries and organizations did during the pandemic in terms of socioeconomic responses, either addressing explicitly migrants or also migrant inclusive responses to the pandemic. So first of all, recognizing the diverse impacts of COVID-19, a variety of different stakeholders, including national and local governments, human rights institutions, international organizations, non-governmental and civil society organizations, all develop different kinds of policy and program responses, often inclusive of or specifically targeted at migrants and their communities. So responses to the pandemic that addressed migrants' needs and vulnerabilities focused on different areas. Some of them really focused on this rights-based approaches and decent work-based approaches, including then the protection of migrant workers or migrants' rights more generally. There were also approaches that focused on social protection and livelihood support programs, and then those that really focused on incorporating, recognizing, enhancing the skills and knowledge of migrants, which could then serve as useful practices and as a basis for launching post-pandemic socioeconomic recovery and also integration and reintegration efforts for migrants in their countries of origin and destination. So a lot of these were kind of ad hoc initiatives during the pandemic, which we could really learn from, of course, for the longer term. Yet, as already said, the pandemic also highlighted several pre-existing structural challenges that migrants faced related to integration, or rather, we could talk about a lack of integration. So for example, migrant workers in high-income countries earned 13% less than national workers, enjoyed less secure contractual status, and were more likely to be working part-time, making them much more vulnerable in terms of their working conditions. The pandemic served to widen these gaps, therefore further eroding the position of migrant workers. And two significant issues in this regard that we identified are discrimination and xenophobia on the one hand, linked to the lack of rights protection, as well as gender and social protection gaps. And then several stakeholders implemented different kinds of strategies and responses to strengthen migrants' position and to address these issues. And you will find a lot more detail again in the paper on both of these and what different actors did to address these challenges. So having taken stock a little bit of what happened during the pandemic, let's then also take a quick look beyond the pandemic. So based on what we found was implemented during, but also prior to the pandemic, because we can of course also learn from what was already going on before then, we developed 7 main strands of policies and programs aimed at facilitating the socioeconomic integration and reintegration of migrants. And again, in the interest of time, I will just quickly name them and refer you to the report for more details. So key areas here include improving the collection and analysis of data on migration, the development and recognition of skills and qualifications, as well as strengthening the employability of and fostering entrepreneurship among migrants. Furthermore, of course, access to social protection, in addition to being a right recognized in international labor standards and human rights law, is key to fostering migrants' integration and reintegration, as is the reduction of gender gaps, because we know that women are often even more vulnerable than male migrants. And finally, the digital innovations and encouraging those can really support migrants in gaining in integration, and this is really gaining importance. And yeah, as the world is kind of developing in this way, to also not leave migrants behind in this kind of space. And then, besides fostering the socioeconomic reintegration of migrants, it is also important to promote social cohesion, as of course the nature of the relationship between communities and return migrants or migrants also influences the process of reintegration and integration. So discrimination and xenophobia not only violate migrants' human rights, but they also promote inequality in society and the workplace, specifically among nationals and migrants, and they of course have then deeply adverse impacts on social cohesion. That's why it is so important to facilitate open dialogue, transparency, and evidence-based information about the positive contribution of migration and migrants, to make the public much more aware of this and kind of get rid of these misconceptions around and xenophobic sentiments. Equally, it is important to have community-led resilience and response systems, meaning mechanisms to meet disruptions and restore stability, to emerge stronger from crises and also kind of anticipate the effects of future possible crises or disasters, and then preventing rights violations from early on in that case. And then finally, the role of social dialogue should also not be underestimated, as it serves to increase social trust that facilitates the implementation of crisis responses to protect individuals and contribute to country socioeconomic sustainability. And that, of course, includes migrants, but also native populations. And that already brings me to a very short conclusion, again, much more extensive in the report. So the pandemic is not over, we all know that, and especially as several new variants have emerged and are still emerging, but countries are beginning to consider reopening, and societies are beginning the process of socioeconomic recovery. It is very important, based on what we found, that these measures include immigrants, and both immigrants and return migrants, including migrant workers in countries of destination, and also then, of course, in countries of origin, both as agents and also as beneficiaries of recovery. So they still play very significant roles in many economies, but of course they also need to be included in any recovery measures. So socioeconomic responses and recovery measures should focus on whole of society and whole of government approaches that address tensions and distrust among different groups. That will not only benefit the migrants, but the societies largely in which they settle or to which they return. So really looking at the whole community, whole of society makes a big difference here, and that's what we saw from the examples we found. This is also again in line with the GCM, which is really based on this understanding that migration can only contribute to sustainable development when it is well governed. So that really requires addressing and reducing the needs and vulnerabilities of migrants and their communities. by respecting their needs and vulnerabilities and their rights, of course. On the other hand, if poorly managed, migration can generate challenges, including many of those that I briefly talked about that were exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic. And what we kind of came to the conclusion on is that the GCM is really a very powerful framework to ensure that as the world recovers from the pandemic, human mobility is safe and inclusive and respects international law, including human rights and international labor standards, as a part of transformative agendas of sustainable development. So many of the socioeconomic policy responses and kind of areas outlined in our report will very much remain relevant during the post-recovery phase. And this necessitates addressing the gaps that still exist, both in the governance of migration, but also integration specifically. And so this phase, in terms of coming back from the crisis and building back better, will be important to further facilitate the implementation of the GCM to achieve better governance of migration at local, national, regional, and global levels, and to strengthen the contributions of migrants and migration to sustainable development. And if my screen would move, that's where I will end my presentation, and I very much look forward to hearing from other people. And I thank you for the attention. And I will be here in case of any questions. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Katrine, for that very efficient but really dense presentation about how much is in the report that we're launching today. And congratulations on your excellent work in preparing the paper. And I'm sure it is going to stimulate quite a bit of dialogue. Colleagues, we're going to go to the panel very soon, but first, to maximize the insights from everyone in this meeting, we're using an online application called Padlet. I would like to give the floor now to my colleague, David Kadur from UNDP, who is going to explain the functioning of this app and hopefully enriching our session today. David, over to you.
Thanks so much, Michelle. Very quickly, so yes, we wanted to have more interaction with all of you, and we know it's not always easy in this format. So you have the opportunity to connect. I have just shared the link, and you will reach this platform, and you can share the point of view if you are representative from civil society, you are a migrant, you are from local governments. You can share your view. You can also share what you think have been the challenges for other colleagues. We will ask 2 questions during the session, and I will summarize at the end. So you are very welcome to participate. You can comment on what other people are saying. So feel free and make it as interactive as possible. You can also, sorry, I have a small issue with my computer. Sorry about that. I wanted to share the QR code. I have an issue now, but I will share it while Michelle is moderating the session. So you just click on the plus and you add the comments you want, and please keep the good relationship and not insulting at each other. Michelle, over to you.
Thanks so much, David. Appreciate those insights, and anything new I know you'll post in the chat. And thank you too, David, for posting the report of which we're launching today in the chat. Everybody can click on the link to that as well. Well, I'd like now to turn to our distinguished panel. And please, may I ask the panelists to turn on your videos. We're really delighted to have with us a number of speakers. Ms. Haikanush Chabanyan, head of the Return and Reintegration Division of the Migration Agency in Armenia, welcome. We have Mr. Nekeril Kant, Senior Assistant Secretary of the State Ministry of Foreign Employment of Sri Lanka. Welcome, Mr. Kant. We have Ms. Lindre Sefomalo, Chair of IOE's Working Group on Migration, and she's the CEO of the Association of Lesotho Employers and Business. And we have Ms. Shannon Lederer, Director of Immigration Policy, American Federation of Labor and Congress of Industrial Organizations, otherwise known as AFL-CIO. Welcome, Lindy and Shannon, also to this panel. Now, each of the speakers will have 5 minutes to exchange on their views. And what I'd like to do is to start with you, Ms. Chevanian. And I'd like to ask, what has been the experience of Armenia in reintegrating return migrants during the pandemic? I know you have much to share. And what policies has Armenia implemented to foster reintegration of return migrants and migrant workers during the pandemic? If you can say something about national or local levels. And thank you very much. You have the floor.
Thank you very much. Do you see my screen? I shared my presentation. Super. Thank you very much for the invitation. It's a great pleasure to be here and to speak about our Armenian experience in the field of return and reintegration. Although it's very difficult to fit in 5 minutes, but I'll try to do it. Sorry, I have some technical. Okay. In my presentation, I will briefly discuss the COVID-19 impact on migration flows, and then I will speak about the structural level reintegration assistance policy of Armenia, and I will conclude my presentation with describing the challenges and next step in the field of return and reintegration. Like other countries, the Republic of Armenia has also faced a number of challenges in the field of migration due to the coronavirus pandemic, all areas of migration, including labor migration, seasonal migration, return, asylum, and refugees. In times of COVID-19, the only type of mobility that has not experienced standstill, but the contrary has been very much active was return. The statistical data confirms that despite this restriction on the freedom of movement, there were return flows to Armenia since 2020, most of which were voluntarily, because during this period, Armenian citizens are prepared to return voluntarily to the country of their permanent residence. Also, from the very beginning of the pandemic, the government took steps to organize the return of over 40,000 Armenian citizens. Due to COVID, seasonal labor migrants were not able to leave for their host countries because of severe travel restriction on one hand, and the long-term migrants were not able to send remittances to Armenia because of lockdowns and quarantine restriction on the other hand. However, the COVID-19 pandemic also pushed and motivated us to accelerate the digitalization of migration management system in Armenia and introduce new approaches and in providing various services to migrants and refugees. Despite all these challenges that our country faces, Armenia provides full access to COVID-19 vaccination to all migrants, refugees, and displaced people residing in the country. The structural level integration assistance policy approach in Armenia provides stakeholders engagement and ownership in reintegration programming, capacity building and strengthening of all actors, and establishment of coordination mechanisms on reintegration. And I'm here referring to Reintegration Handbook of IOM from 2019. As for the policy development, the government has initiated the drafting of integration and reintegration strategy for 2022 till 2032 and its action plan for implementation. The document has been already submitted to the government for approval. This strategy outlines several goals, including reforms in the institutional framework for integration and reintegration, as well as capacity building and competence development for staff involved in the process. The strategy has target 6 groups, and one of them are returnees, both volunteer and forced returnees. The strategy outlines goals related to shelter and living conditions, right and social assistance, access to healthcare and education, investing in and developing human capital, cultural integration, and cultivating conducive environment. Documents also highlights the importance of sectorial components of integration and reintegration, and the strategy is based on the fundamental principle of supremacy of human rights and dignity, social solidarity and security, importance to cultural diversity, holistic approach, but at the same time individual approach, co-management and cooperation of sectorial components by relevant state structures, as well as coordination of intervention between them. Besides the policy development, concrete steps were taken also to provide reintegration support to returning citizens in Armenia by the government. In 2020, the state program of priority support to the reintegration of citizens returning to Armenia, including forced returnees, was adopted by the government and implemented so far. Migration Service mainly provides consultative and referral support to returning migrants, as well as a housing subsidy for renting an apartment for 6 months. So there are target group of the programs are both forced returnees, those who are returning under their admission agreements, deported or expelled from foreign countries, but at the same time voluntary returnees with some limitation, particularly families with 4 and more children and persons with disabilities. There are certain criteria to fulfill for the beneficiaries. What is also important to tell that almost all the work is carried out with migrants is digitalized, taking into consideration the COVID situation. At the same time, return policies, including especially the state program, are developed on the basis of vulnerability of beneficiaries rather than their migration experience. As for the statistics, so far during the last 3 years, around 100 persons benefited from the program, and they are mainly returnees from Germany, Austria, Sweden, France, and Russian Federation. There are also other projects implemented in Armenia by international and local organizations. You see International Organization for Migration, Armenian Caritas, ICMPD. Also, French OFI has representation, regional representation in Armenia. It's important for cooperation and coordination, all the activities implemented in this field. I would like to highlight one important project that we have implemented since 2020. It's an EU Impact for Armenia. This project aims to contribute to empowerment of Armenian labor migrants, returnees, and their family members through mobilizing remittances and investing in local development and job creation in Armenia. So this project, the duration of the project is 4 years, and applicants shall make their own investment in the amount equal to the requested grant. And the grants provided for business establishment as well as to help to acquire required knowledge and skills for proper, competent, and professional business management. So far, more than 120 applications were received and proceed by the project, and the eligible applicants were accepted for initial trainings, and the shortlisted applicant will continue with the online business training. For the capacity building, so it's for integration programs involve strengthening the skill structures, processes, or resources of key stakeholders so they can facilitate the sustainable reintegration of returnees. As a part of a capacity building series of trainings for reintegration counselors, on the topic of effective communication, data protection, project management are conducted for the capacitating and strengthening of all actors involved in return and reintegration field. In addition, we have psychologists working at Migration Service, and the psychological support provides to both staff working with returnees as well as program beneficiaries. This is possible, of course, to realize with the extensive cooperation with international partners. At the same time, I would like to mention that huge experience and knowledge accumulated in the field of return and reintegration in Armenia. Having implementation in reintegration support programs for more than 15 years, the organizations have gained rich experience, accumulated valuable knowledge and skills. And currently, Migration Service has initiated capitalizing this experience into institutionalizing this process. One of the examples of this is the drafting of handbook for the reintegration case managers on counseling and referral mechanism. Last but not least, awareness raising activities both inside and outside of the countries are also ongoing. We have established info point for the Armenian return migrants at the Zvartnots International Airport to inform returnees about the available assistance project in the country. At the same time, Back to Armenia web portal is in process of finalization for returnees, but also for potential returnees to get information about all the issues related to return and organization of their return. Continuous work is ongoing on campaigns on combating irregular immigration, and we also organize media and migration trainings for journalists.
Thank you so
Another
much.
important.
If we could perhaps move more quickly. I'm sorry, we have a number of speakers. Thank you so much.
Okay, just very briefly, the last slide maybe. Yes. And the overall coordination also in reintegration activities is led by Immigration Service, and we have this return and reintegration quarterly meeting forum. This is a kind of unique forum, and it is a very good platform for cooperation that brings state bodies, international and non-governmental organizations dealing with these issues, and where they can share their experience and information regarding reintegration project implemented in Armenia. Okay, maybe I will stop here, although I have some challenges on next step, but I can share the presentation if you are interested in our further experience.
Thank you so much, Ms. Chervanyan. And yes, maybe you could post the PowerPoint in the chat, and people can look at it. It's very rich information. So thank you so much for sharing those practices. I'd like now to turn to Mr. Kant from Sri Lanka to provide your insights on the challenges that Sri Lanka has faced. And I know there have been many, but there's also been quite a number of actions you're taking on particularly reintegration of returning migrants and migrant workers. Mr. Kant, you have the floor. I can see you now.
Yes, thank you very much for the opportunity. I think on behalf of Sri Lanka, I am from the State Ministry of Foreign Employment Promotion and Market Diversification. So, which is the line ministry look after this foreign employment related subject. So, I think as you all know, this COVID pandemic has affected all countries, not only Sri Lanka. It is common to all over the world. However, Sri Lanka also has faced some difficulties in mobility restriction and also repatriation from the country of destination, reintegration and vaccination, and increased vulnerability for human trafficking and labor exploitation. So Sri Lanka has a labor migration policy in 2008, which is forefront in the South Asian region. However, we felt that the sub-policy and the national action plan also needed for the return and reintegration of migrant workers in order to look after the welfare and other facilities of the migrant workers and their families. That's why Sri Lanka also formulated the sub-policy on the return and reintegration in 2015. However, during this pandemic time, that also not enough. We felt there are some challenges. So with the support and the technical support of the ILO and IOM, our government of Sri Lanka, together with the Sri Lanka Bureau of Foreign Employment, have developed a national COVID action plan. That means in order to respond to the COVID pandemic situation, we have developed the action plan. So based on that, Sri Lanka has acted. So during that period, we have 5 components of this action plan. One component is the measures to be taken at the country of destination. So other component is the measures to be taken when they return to Sri Lanka. And the third measure, we have focused on the measures taken at the point of entry and immediate post-arrival. And also, we have focused on the measures taken in the Sri Lanka when they are in Sri Lanka and reintegration. And also, there is another option when the people want to remigrate. So we have to take some measures in order to support for the remigration of the migrant workers. So these are the 5 components of the national action plan of the COVID response. So based on that, we have Sri Lanka has reacted when the pandemic situation was in peak. There were some safe houses we have maintained in 16 destination countries in order to support for the migrant workers who are stranded there. And also Sri Lankan government has provided some humanitarian assistance through the dry ration and other facilities. And also we have talked with the country of destination in order to support for this migrant workers. So those country of destination also given their hand in order to support for the Sri Lankan migrant workers. So we would be very much thankful for the countries, especially Oman, Kuwait, Jordan, and UAE, Saudi Arabia, those countries, and Qatar. Also they have supported. And also sometimes they have re-employed, even though the contract of the employer's employment is ended, they have re-employed those migrant workers as a measure of goodwill. So those are the activities when they were in the country of destination. And when they return, so initially the repatriation was facilitated under government quarantine centers with no cost to the migrant workers. But however, the number of migrant workers were increased. We have another option also, the bay quarantine centers also, hotel quarantine also we have arranged. So after that, the measures has been taken when they come to Sri Lanka immediately after the arrival. So when during the quarantine centers, we have collect some data with the migrant workers, what they are going to do or what their expectation. So some of them, they have informed that they want to have the self-employment or the business to be started. And some of them, they want to go for a local employment in Sri Lanka. And some of them, they have opted for the remigration. So we have got the support from ILO and some other stakeholders from the government department. And based on that, even though sometimes when they are in the quarantine centers, they might say something. So after return to their home, they might change their opinion. So we did a survey, and even though the restrictions were there, travel restrictions were there, over the phones also we verified. And based on that, we have provided some livelihood support and income generation activities. And also with the joint program of the ILO, IOM, with the government of Japan funding, we have some socio infrastructure projects in order to reintegrate these migrant workers. And also the government of Sri Lanka also with the support, because we have the Sri Lanka Bureau of Foreign Employment, they have this welfare unit. So under that, we have some grant assistance in order to start their business. And also we have some program in order to recognize their prior learning. And we call it RPLs. There are some mechanisms. So we have provided, and we also find out the gap filling also through that. And we have introduced a skills passport program that is a smart card, something like that. So it's a kind of CV. So it will be used when the migrant worker want to get the local employment as well as the foreign employment. When they use, it is the government recognized system. So that system also we have introduced. Apart from that, the government of Sri Lanka has also provided some trainings in order to upskill their skill. And also we had some mechanism to in order to collaborate with the private sector. So the private sector also very much supportive to give them a local employment opportunities. And those who want to remigrate, there are some issues we have faced that with some countries of destination, they have specific vaccine, especially Pfizer or something like that. So we have the massive vaccination program. So the government of Sri Lanka given the priority for these migrant workers or the prospective migrant workers to get these vaccines as per the country of destination's specification. So these are some activities the government of Sri Lanka taken for the remigration of these migrant workers. And apart from that, for the sustainable reintegration, so there are some economic reintegration, and there are some social reintegration, and there are some psychosocial aspect also to be addressed. So we are now incorporating a national policy, because earlier we have a national policy and also have a subnational policy. But now, after the wild consultation with all various stakeholders and even the public opinion also we received, so now we have revised this national policy on labor migration, and it is to be submitted for the Cabinet of Ministers for the approval. After that, it will be implemented with the action plan. So that is the current development. We have considered this COVID pandemic and similar pandemic as well. And also regarding this human trafficking and human smuggling vulnerabilities, we have developed the anti-human trafficking action plan. There's a task force. So we have developed an action plan. So we are now implementing that action plan. So each and every members of this anti-human trafficking task force also working on this in order to reduce the vulnerabilities of this human trafficking as well as the human smuggling. And also now our foreign employment migration sector is governed by the Sri Lanka Bureau of Foreign Employment Act. It need to have some modification or the amendment, because there are some lacuna in order to control these sub-agents or the intermediaries. So we are now propose some amendment for that act, that also waiting the Cabinet of Ministers approval. So after that, it also will sort it out the intermediaries or the sub-agents issues, those who are involving in the human trafficking and human smuggling as well. So those are the mechanisms. But I think our regional forums, such as Abu Dhabi Dialogue and the Colombo process, also has some discussion regarding the pandemic situation and how we are going to face as a team or as a regional or the collective body in order to face this pandemic situation. I think that also will be that talking point in the future activities or the future forums as well. And also now we are going to make a GCM action plan. So our ministry is going to chair that action plan implementation part and monitoring part. So that also will be the first meeting will be held in 24th of this month. So those are the current development. I think, thank you very much for the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Kant. A lot of information there, but hopefully you'll also maybe feel free to post things in the chat. We're running a little bit behind, colleagues, but let me now turn to Ms. Sifomolo to discuss the challenges that are faced by migrants in and from Lesotho during the COVID pandemic. And if you could explain also what measures have been taken by the private sector to avoid migrants' exclusion from labor markets and facilitate their access to training opportunities and decent jobs. Thanks. You have the floor. Sorry, your microphone is off, Lindway.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Michelle. I'm going to talk about the global perspective. As you're aware, I'm representing the International Organization of Employers and not necessarily the Lesotho situation. Well, first of all, the challenges that we as employers face is that most countries don't have what we call a skills needs list or register, or skills gaps needs segregated by sector. This information assists us in terms of assisting migrants in matching their skills. We need to know which skills are needed in order to match them. We need to know which skills are available in order to employ. Now, in the absence of such assessments, it becomes a bit difficult. Secondly, We also, I believe the migrants also need an inventory of major public projects available so that even returnees can access jobs that are available in such projects. And these projects have the potential of absorbing not only migrants, but also the returnees, obviously. Now, thirdly, there is a need to harmonize skills. There's a need to recognize skills across countries. Returnees at times come with specific skills, whether it's in the area of technology. And then the question is that technology available in the country of origin? Now, also, as well as recognizing skills, there is a need to assist and meet migrants halfway in terms of improving literacy and language proficiency, and as well as providing adult education through vocational training. Now, with regards to your second question, private sector, it does mobilize in certain areas. It does mobilize migrant workers and migrant entrepreneurs. But one question that was asked by one of our members of the International Organization of Employers is, have you seen the public sector ever employing migrant workers? So, and getting to look at it, it really, I'm failing to find countries that actually employ, except for the high-skilled employees, countries that employ migrant workers in government. So, but then we as employers, we strive by all means to ensure the empowerment of migrants where they're there. We try and develop their skills equally with nationals, and we try and ensure inclusion of the migrants wherever they are. But obviously there's need to strengthen national labor mobility policies so that we answer these challenges that are faced by migrants. The policies should also talk to the issue of the public sector also employing migrants. And they should also talk to the need to capacitate the private sector to support migrants on the job training as well as lifelong learning and career development. So that would be my answer in brief, Michelle. Weary of the time, we need the national policies to answer the national economic recovery strategies, and we need policies to also respond to the question of, some people they call it the agenda of integration. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Pomono. That was really quite succinct, but also very clear in terms of the priorities and in terms of what the private sector and what business is doing. So thank you very much for that intervention. I'd like now to turn to Ms. Lederer and ask how you see migrant workers being affected during the pandemic, and if you can share your perspective from the US and some of the initiatives that are being taken by workers' organizations to support migrants in labor markets, facilitate their access to training, to rights protection, and so on. Thanks. Shannon, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. And greetings, brothers, sisters, siblings. It's a pleasure to be with all of you today and to have an opportunity to share some trade union perspectives on this important topic. To state the obvious, working people around the world have been hard hit by the pandemic, and in particular, those who are already marginalized in our precarious global economy. That's why the labor movement has sounded the call for a new social contract that ensures equality, inclusion, climate-friendly jobs, rights for all workers, and universal social protection. We have really a long way to go, my friends, to fix the systems that are failing workers. And as we seek to transition from pandemic relief to a real and just recovery, it's critical that we think boldly about the structural changes that are needed to address pernicious injustices and promote decent work for all. That will require, as has been said, a whole of government approach that ends the shameful exclusion of migrant workers from the social safety net and centers the objectives of economic, trade, migration, and foreign policy on the needs of working people and protecting the environment. As a threshold issue for integration, states must maximize opportunities for irregular migrants to regularize their status and come under the full protection of labor and employment laws. We cannot build back better without addressing the pressing needs and acute exploitation of millions of migrant workers who currently lack formal status. The AFL-CIO's goal of winning a pathway to citizenship for all those who live and work in the United States, got to be honest, it remains a political challenge, but we press on. And while we keep up the fight for permanence, we're also calling for temporary measures that afford work authorization and address pressing human needs. In particular, we want to see designations of temporary protected status to prevent forced returns to countries destabilized by conflict or disasters, and accessible affirmative protections for irregular migrants who exercise their labor rights and take action to keep our workplaces safe and fair. Our unions don't just want migrants to be integrated into the labor market. We want them to have full and equal rights and protections. Trade unions can never accept tiered rights for workers, yet the vast majority of temporary labor migration pathways severely constrain rights and treat migrants as a contingent, disposable, on-demand workforce. This is not decent work. The abusive reality of these programs became even more clear amidst the pandemic, as many U.S. guest worker programs remained active and even grew without adequate safeguards in place and despite sweeping barriers to other forms of migration. Preventing abuses in labor recruitment is one important step in the much larger work that's needed to fundamentally reform the structure of labor migration pathways so that migrants will be more fully and fairly integrated into destination country labor markets. Our unions are advocating for reforms that would ensure migrant workers are treated and paid fairly, united with their families, and able to change jobs, access justice, and earn a path to permanence. Rather than expanding abusive temporary labor migration pathways, a clear emerging priority in the context of mass human displacement is the need to increase humanitarian resettlement commitment and capacity and effectively integrate more refugees and asylum seekers into the workforce. Unions in the United States are starting to experiment with how we can play a more active role in that process. One such experiment is underway right now in Seattle, Washington. The pandemic forced unions there to get creative and try new strategies to organize and defend workers. One tool the local labor council developed was a digital hiring hall that allows people to search and apply for union jobs. Now that the platform is up and running, it has become an important vehicle to help place migrants and refugees, including those newly arriving from Afghanistan, into jobs where they will have union rights and representation. We urge states to incubate and invest in such initiatives so they can be brought to scale. Everyone who has a job should have the chance to join a union, particularly those who are at greatest risk of abuse when seeking to navigate workplace issues on their own. With union membership comes representation at work, the added legal protection of a collective bargaining agreement, increased training opportunities, and a means to promote social cohesion with the existing workforce, all of which help to mitigate negative socioeconomic outcomes for migrants. Indeed, union membership disproportionately benefits those who need it most. So it's imperative that states remove all real and practical barriers to freedom of association for migrants as a foundational part of their integration efforts. Workers and their unions have concrete proposals, and we expect and deserve a seat at the table as policies that affect our workforce are shaped. Meaningful integration strategies must respect the rights and contributions of all workers, regardless of status, by focusing on policies such as regularization, reform of labor migration pathways, and increased humanitarian resettlement. Together, workers will break cycles of exploitation and ensure decent work the same way we always have, through organizing, collective bargaining, and mobilizing to win overdue changes. That is how our labor movement will continue to fight for a new social contract and a more just and inclusive recovery for all.
Thanks so much, Shannon, for sharing those insights and also recommendations. It gives a very good perspective and overview, and I think you made really important points. I'd like now to thank all of the panelists for their really rich discussion. We've had a wide variety of comments, but also practices. And I think now we would like to open the floor to hear from all of you, your insights, your comments. I also understand that many of you have been providing some comments on the Padlet and using that app, and my colleague David will present those comments shortly. But as I open the floor for comments, I also see that we have two migrants who wish to address the meeting and talk about their experiences. The first is Helen A., a migrant domestic worker in Jordan. And please, colleagues, be very short. I'll ask all the colleagues making statements if you could be very, very short so we don't lose too much time going into the next session where we have another rich set of discussions that will take place. And after Helen will be Mr. Guerrero. He's a returning migrant in Mexico, and I'll call on you, Carlos. But first, Helen A., you have the floor. If you could turn on your video, please, if you're able to.
Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak. My name is Helen, and I'm a migrant domestic worker in Jordan. Migrant workers in the Middle East are very vulnerable and marginalized because of the sponsorship system or the Kapala system that ties workers to their employers and deprives them from their rights and freedoms. I'm one of millions of migrant workers in the Middle East who suffered severely because of the pandemic. In the beginning of the pandemic, I had to choose between losing my job or risking my health by going to work in dangerous conditions. And because public transportation stopped, I had to walk 6 hours a day to go to and come back from my employer's house in order to survive and not lose my wage. I had to stand in long lines to get bread, and until today, I have to buy the cheapest food because I earn less money than before. It saddens me that I'm unable to transfer money to support my family in my home country. I'm just going to share some examples on how COVID impacted migrant workers in general, especially domestic workers who work under the Kapala system. In terms of health, employers don't offer personal protection kits. Social distancing is not possible for the domestic workers who are more vulnerable to the infection because they work and live inside the employer's house. Although they don't leave the house because they are not allowed to, they get infected through their employers. A lot of workers in our community got infected and were forced to work while they're sick without providing them with medicines. And some of them don't do the PCR test at all. Public transportation means the workers are using are also not provided with sanitizers, and social distancing is not applied. The vaccine is now available for everyone in Jordan, regardless of nationality. However, many employers don't take domestic workers for vaccination. Also, undocumented workers are still afraid to go to the vaccination centers, especially if their passports and ID documents are confiscated by the employers. According to a government decision, any unvaccinated worker will be deported from Jordan. I would like to mention here that only a third of the population approximately got vaccinated. So huge efforts are needed to raise the awareness of employers and workers rather than scaring them. And there's a need to facilitate the vaccination process in safe and known places for workers, such as their embassies. In our worker community, we try our best to raise workers' awareness and guide them to get vaccinated, and many of them got the booster shot. In terms of economic rights, more workers became victims of wage theft or non-payment of wages and forced labor during the pandemic. More workers lost their jobs or got terminated, especially part-time jobs. Most of migrant workers in Jordan are not covered by Social Security, so they went back home empty-handed or got excluded from the government's humanitarian aids and compensations to their workers who got affected by the pandemic. Those who are covered by Social Security, it's calculated based on their very low wages, and it's not portable. Many domestic workers became grandmothers and are older than the retirement age, but they're still working and they don't enjoy Social Security. At the social level, migrant workers are suffering more and more from xenophobia. They're seen as people who transmit diseases or as strangers who came to take nationalist job opportunities. Domestic workers are described as unskilled workers, and our work is not valued, which makes us more vulnerable to exploitation, gender-based violence, and harassment. Other factors make us vulnerable, such as skin color, race, nationality, religion, age, etc. Thank you very much for listening to me, and I appreciate your support to the Migrants' Voice.
Thank you so much, Helen, for your insights. You're on the front lines, and so it's really important to hear from you. And of course, migrant rights are at the center of some of the discussion that we're having today, and certainly very critical. You've raised a number of points. I'd go now to Mr. Gennaro Coyetkal Guerrero. He's a returned migrant in Mexico, but Carlos, I think you have the ability to get the connection right. So I would just ask to turn on the video if that's appropriate, or just you have the floor.
Muchas gracias. Buenas tardes a todos y a todos. Me permito presentarles al
Thank you
señor
very much. Thank you, everyone. Soy Coyocatl Guerrero, beneficiary of a program from the government of Puebla in Mexico. He owns Pizzeria La Capilla Italiana. I'll give the floor to Mr. Genaro so he might share his story. Hello, I'm Mr. Guerrero. For the last 4 years, I was deported 4 years ago from the United States. With Miram Emprende, I've got some support. I have my pizzeria. And with their help, I was able to buy tables and chairs. And you're welcome to come any day you want to. Come and meet us. So we've also learned to do all sorts of pizzas, pastas, etc., developed our abilities. And I also included seafood. We are now a pizza restaurant and also a seafood restaurant. So thank you for their help. It's been really useful, and I am delighted that you have this program, or that they have this program, because they have been a great help to me. And as I said, with their funds, I was able to buy beautiful tables for my restaurant. So just to say thank you, and anytime you want to, we're here. You can come and visit us in Puebla. And either you want to come, we'll be here and we'll welcome you. And I'll cook for you. Thank you very much, Mr. Genaro, for your contribution. Thank you all as well for remembering me and letting me speak. And as I was saying, any day you want to try beautiful Italian food, pizza, pasta, hamburger, chicken wings, anything, you can come. And as I was saying, seafood, anything you want to, we have everything here. Everything very tasty.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much. Now, I have one person with their hand up, Jenny Beres. Before I call on you, I'd just like to ask that there is a question that, based on the COVID-19 experience, what do you think should be the priorities in terms of migrant integration? And so if speakers could please talk to that, or please post in the Padlet. Jenny Beres, you have the floor. I see your hand up, but I don't see your video.
Okay. Okay, buenas tardes, buenos días. Mi nombre es Jenny Contreras. Yo soy
Good afternoon. So I am from Nicaragua. I've been in Costa Rica for 6 months, and the main situations in which I face integration problems is because, in spite of the fact that Costa Rica is open to migrants and who has very important policies in the area of education and health, and they have a specific organization for human development of migrants, the reality from theory to practice is very, very different. In primary schools, for example, I hear about situations in which my compatriots their children are not welcome in schools, even though the law actually says that these children should have access to education without extra paperwork. We also see, for example, during the pandemic, that it has been very difficult to get an appointment. In fact, I had to just show up to an institution because there were no access to personal visits. Everything had to be through previous appointment. And I understand that because of the pandemic, but no one was picking up the phone. So sometimes arriving at a country, something as simple as calling a specific company becomes very, very difficult. And as regards Costa Rica and as regards migration, they only have one line, one phone line for migrants, and I understand that's difficult, but many people have no access. They don't understand why they cannot access some advice if they don't have that phone line. We also see how other people try to take advantage of these communities. So what is my point? And I'm basing my point in a report by the Dirección of Human Reintegration and Development. There are many needs that migrants have in this country, and it's very similar to what Helen was talking about. I feel very close to what she said, even though I'm miles away. There are many services we have no access to. When a person does not know a country, they have to visit one institution after another. You get tired, you get defeated. And in my country, I am a lawyer, but here I just have some degree. Nobody cares. That's a problem migrants have. I really have the motivation to fight for to move forward in my life. But if I don't get the support, it's not possible. And some migrants don't even have the knowledge of the strength to do it. I think that we are in a country which has almost perfect migration policy, has an open door policy, has all the options, but many times that's not good enough if it's only the theory and we don't get it in practice. If your civil servant representing those institutions do not have the knowledge to show or translate what that policy means in reality. So I am thankful to Costa Rica for all the openness, but it's really difficult even to integrate my children. I had to get access to a person to tell me what to do. I was lucky enough to get advice from a person, but what happens to those who do not get it, who don't know how to get it? That is what the question I want to put forward, and that's why I came to this week of migration issues, because this situation must be known. So yes, the programs are there, the help is there, but we have to help as regards making the population aware that how to empower migrants, how to give them access. I am a person with rights since we're children until we are adults, and that's the most important thing about each one of us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jenny, for that that intervention and sharing what you're going through and how you're trying to work through this. Obviously, so many gaps, and I think the report actually recognizes quite a number of those and provides recommendations along the lines of what you were saying, you know, assistance and real support. We also, I'm just looking around the floor to see if there are others who wish to come in and with any questions or comments. Just bear with me while I'm seeing, just want to make sure we're not missing anyone. But we are going to show now a very short video before we start our next session, which will be moderated by David Kudur, my colleague from UNDP. And I know, David, this is a video about what's happening in Colombia. I believe so. And If you wanted to say any introductory words, please go ahead. Otherwise, we just show the video and it'll be 3 minutes. So don't worry, please everyone, stay around, watch the video. It's very short, but I think very impactful. And then we move to the next session.
Soy madre cabeza de familia, migrante. Llegué a este país totalmente desorientada y sin saber de qué forma emprender.
Y en el año 2020, la OIT nos contactó, la Organización Internacional del Trabajo, muy interesados en vincularse al proyecto de evaluación y certificación de competencias laborales. Y lo planteado por la OIT es cómo realmente se había demostrado que este proyecto era de resultados inmediatos para la población.
Mi emprendimiento se llama J&E Manos Mágicas.
Tengo un salón de belleza.
Mi emprendimiento lleva por nombre Delicias Mis Ángeles.
Ellos me contactaron para darme la buena noticia de que había sido seleccionada y que era beneficiaria del programa con la formación que ellos brindan, tanto virtual como presencial, tanto con las herramientas que te dan físicas. Sin duda alguna mi emprendimiento se ha visto fortalecido.
Estamos en una capacitación con ellos, en capacitaciones permanentes que es de emprendimiento, de fortalecimiento a redes sociales.
Se les acompañó a ellos con unos talleres que tienen que ver con la empoderamiento de los migrantes a la situación económica de nuestro país. Esta certificación también posibilita la demostración de las competencias que tiene un emprendedor para vincularse a una determinada actividad económica, pero sobre todo para desempeñar esas funciones que en un momento dado se requieren en el campo del emprendimiento.
Estoy creciendo en mi negocio, gracias a Dios, con toda la ayuda que me han prestado.
Gracias por la oportunidad.
Infinitamente agradecida con Colombia, con los colombianos, con todas las organizaciones de las que he recibido apoyo.
Thanks, colleagues. Thanks, Michelle, for the excellent moderation and our panelists. I will take the floor. We have 10 minutes left. And what we wanted to do now is, well, lots of you, it's very impressive how many participants have contributed to the Padlet consultation. I'm sharing again, I'm sorry, there was a problem with the second Padlet, so feel free to contribute to this one. I'm going to share my screen and comment a little bit on all the interventions, and you are free also to comment directly on the Padlet or add more comments. So and bear with me. I hope that it's going to work. Sorry. Sorry, you can also use this QR code in any case. So, sorry, here. So I hope everybody can see my my screen. Please tell me if not. So the first question was, what have been the main challenges that yourself or the institution you represent have experienced during the COVID-19 pandemic? Lots of contributions. I'm not going to read all of them, but I think what is striking is on the one hand, lots of comments on the border closure, on the lack of cooperation between states, and the fact that all these policies have translated into lots of issues for people not being able to move, some people being stranded, some people not being to returning. Sorry, do you see my screen or do you only see the QR code? Can someone tell me?
I'm only seeing the QR code, David.
Okay.
I don't know if there's something else, but I'm on the Padlet so I can see what the Padlet says, sorry, but I don't know if people.
Now it should work. Does it work? Yeah, okay.
Yes.
Sorry about that.
Good, thanks.
So in any case, what I was saying was still accurate, but now you can see all the responses. As I was saying, so the first round of comments on the policies themselves of mobility or lack of mobility. A second concern, and in particular on the side of the migrants, is about the problems of livelihoods, access to work during the pandemic, which is increased by the fact that lots of migrants didn't have access to computers, to internet. So it was an additional challenge for them. But as you can see, the mention of loss of livelihoods, the mention of financial constraints, has been an issue. In terms of response and related with that, some colleagues have mentioned the issue of lack of data to know who are the migrants who have been most affected by the COVID pandemic and the socioeconomic crisis. So this problem of data that translated into lack of inclusion of migrants, immigrants, returnees in the policies. And connecting with the presentations we had, it's very interesting to see. I mean, we had two presentations, two representatives from Armenia, Sri Lanka, talking about reintegration programs. That's a key aspect of what we have been doing in this work, and we wanted to discuss today. Immigrants, including asylum seekers and refugees, how they have been affected, but also the challenges faced by returnees. Then there are interesting discussions about also the role of local governments, which sometimes were not prepared to face the challenges in terms of resources, in terms of capacity. So this is also an important aspect to take into account, not only the national level, but also the local level. And then the other actors, there are lots of comments you can see by yourself. I mean, on issue of xenophobia, of discrimination, and therefore the need to take these aspects into account. We have very interesting experiences from trade unions and the way migrant workers and non-migrant workers have been collaborating. We see lots of initiatives, and thanks Shannon too for putting forward the role of trade unions and different associations in precisely also taking into account the challenges of migrant workers. We have some comments about the private sector. and its role, and we also had an intervention from Lesotho to discuss this issue. Probably we would need more insights on this issue of the role of the private sector. But overall, I think most of the comments are in line with the challenges we have heard during the session. And in particular, and it was very good to hear migrants' voices too. We will prepare a report based on these different collaborations, and we will share with the participants. And now I would like to move to the second Padlet. So I'm going to share my screen again. We have less contribution than the first one, but we also had a shorter period of time to answer, plus some technical challenges. So the second question was based on the COVID-19 experience. What do you think should be the priorities in terms of migrant integration? So you can see the need for empowering migrant population, and that's connected to the previous point of lack of access to livelihoods and decent jobs during the pandemic, plus the issue of access to social protection too. There is a comment on the access to documents. I think we have to acknowledge that many countries have done a great job moving from a situation of lots of vulnerability towards more flexibility in the visa system, in the migration policy to facilitate migrants' lives, even though it's not always easy. So this issue of documents is mentioned a couple of times. In terms of the role of national governments, there is a comment on the need to have gender-responsive policies. And this is something that we have seen also during the presentation, with a very strong representation of women, I have to say, in terms of gender balance. So that was also very good. So the need to take into account the risks and vulnerabilities faced by migrant women and girls. Need for better coordination between national authorities, and it's true that it's something that we need always to take better into account. Migration is not just about immigrants or Ministry of Interior or Ministry of Foreign Affairs, but it's about Ministry of Labor, Ministry of Education, Ministry of Health, and so on and so forth. The need to give full working rights to migrants, that was also highlighted during the first session, and also mention of the rights to asylum seekers and refugees, which has been a big challenge during the pandemic too. Again, the role of local governments, and I already highlighted what some comments mention about the lack of financial resources, but also sometimes human capacity. So it's important to include these migrant populations, and there are some suggestions here. So again, great contributions. We have tried to innovate with this methodology. I hope you enjoyed it, and also all the panelists. I'm going to close and not adding too much. Just again, thanks all the panelists, all the participants. It was really great to hear migrant voices, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen. It was really great to hear, and thanks to Helen, who shared her experience, to Renardo, to Yeni. It changes also for us to hear from migrants themselves and not always representatives from government. So thanks for that. I think one key lesson from all this is that we shouldn't only think of integration policies when we have in times of crisis. One of the main reasons why migrants have been hit so hard, it's precisely because they were not good integration or reintegration policies. So we should learn from that, and member states in particular, about how we can already improve our integration policies, our reintegration policies. I think we have the IMRF, the International Migration Review Forum, which is in 3 months. And we should seize the opportunity to think about what should be our commitments with respect to this issue of integration, of reintegration, and also in terms of social cohesion. Member states are supposed to prepare pledges for the IMRF, so it's a good opportunity to think about what kind of pledges you want to make, and how it can precisely improve and contribute to improving migrants and their communities' lives. Gender responsive policies, it's key. It has been highlighted by the panelists, by the contributions in the consultation. Also involve more actors, work with trade unions, more work with the private sector. That's really key. Include host communities, return communities into the responses. We know there is a growing feeling of xenophobia, of discrimination. So it's very important that the responses, either from governments, national, local governments, or even international organizations like ours, also include these host and return communities into their responses. So I don't want to add more. I think we have a very busy week. It's the migration week, lots of events. So we will have many opportunities to keep discussing migration and to meet each other. Thanks all of you for your very active participation. Thanks to Michelle and to the colleagues from the UN Network on Migration for this for the success, I hope, of this event, and see you, all of you, very soon in the next event or the next events. Have a great week. Bye bye.
Thank you, colleagues. Stay safe.